I reckon we'll kick off with a bit of a bio on both of you, if you don't mind, and we'll kick off some conversation around healing and our wonderful healing techniques that we have. So I'll start off with ANTAC, and this is so bad of me, but I'm so scared of trying to pronounce these words because I have some brothers that are from APY lands on listening to us at the moment, namely Dom and Phil, that are probably going to laugh at me a little bit. But the Anangu Ngangkari Tjutaku Aboriginal Corporation, I think I got them both right besides the last word, is the first organisation of Aboriginal traditional healers in Australia. ANTAC is a non-for-profit social enterprise registered under the Corporations Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Act 2006. ANTAC is a registered charity accredited by the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission as a public benevolent institution and deductible gift recipient. So if you want to donate to ANTAC, they can receive donations. So get on and support them. ANTAC is the result of a shared vision between Dr. Francesca, who's with us, and the Ngangkari, Aboriginal traditional healers from the APY lands. The vision is to support the maintenance of practice of 60,000-year-old Aboriginal traditional medicine knowledge systems in the 21st century. We came together to bring Ngangkari's healing to communities, families and individuals, and reach out as many people as possible, With us today is Dr. Francesca, who spent 4 years, 2008 to 2012, travelling across South Australia in search of for answers to the lack of recognition of Aboriginal traditional medicine in international and national health policy frameworks and strategies. Her inquiry into the status and role of Aboriginal traditional medicine is articulated in hand-in-hand report on Aboriginal traditional medicine. So you can suss that out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks, sis. Yeah.
My pleasure. And one of my personal mentors and someone I love dearly is Uncle Paul Callaghan. And Paul Callaghan belongs to the land of the Worimi people, which is located about an hour north from Newcastle. Paul has held a number of senior executive positions in his career, such as Institute Director, New England TAFE, with responsibility for 23,000 students, 1,200 staff, an annual budget around 60 million, and Chief Executive Aboriginal Housing Officer. He has qualifications in the disciplines of surveying, drafting, accounting, economics, training, executive leadership, emotional intelligence. I'm waiting to gain some of that from him to have passed on to me. Company boards, executive coaching, and is currently undertaking a PhD at the University of New England. His most important learning, however, has been through going bush with elders. In addition to consultancy services, Paul is a motivational speaker, a storyteller, a dancer, and an author. In 2014, he published a book entitled Iridescence, Finding Your Colours and Living Your Story, and has recently been contracted by Pentira Press to write 2 books, the first entitled Whispers of the Ancients, a guide to renewal through Indigenous wisdoms. Thank you for joining us, Paul. It feels odd calling you Paul. Uncle PC is what I will probably refer to him as today if people don't mind. But thank you both for joining us and for being part of this panel. We've had some wonderful wisdom come through, and you guys are our last panel over the last couple of days, so no pressure, but I'm hoping we go out with a bit of a bang, which would be great. First question I'm going to hit you up with, and please, anyone who's tuning in, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat or just unmute your mic and jump in and have a conversation. But why traditional healing? What's so important about traditional healing and the impacts that it can have on Aboriginal peoples, but more specifically for the context of this conversation, Aboriginal males?
I go first, or you?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it has been, like a learning process, of course. I'm Italian originally, so for me, it has been a discovery, like a step-by-step discovery of, well, first of all, what it is, Aboriginal traditional healing, and why it is important. So, my starting point was more like a question in my mind because I come from the academia. So it was more like an inquiry about, not finding any kind of mention or recognition in the closing the gap, for example, policy framework or international reports by the World Health Organization on Indigenous traditional healing in Australia. So for me, it started with more, if you want to say, an academic question, but it became more like a curiosity and really wanting to discover why and what had happened here in Australia. So, and this is turned into, the meeting with the Ngangkari from South Australia and developing a friendship. So really it has been building up over now it's about 10 years and more. So why it is important from my point of view, which is like a non-Aboriginal external kind of point of view, working with an anchor and learning through, I have witnessed and I continue to witness, the powerful benefits that, the healing have on people from a physical point of view, from an emotional point of view, psychological, and, most of all, a spiritual point of view. And I would like to emphasize this element, among others. I mean, there is a lot to talk about, but I think that Aboriginal traditional healing, as far as I have learned it, as just spending time with them and just setting up a Ngangkari service delivery program. So, parentheses, I only had experience with the Ngangkari, who are the Ngangkari traditional healer from APY Central Australia area. So I don't know anything about the other healers across Australia. So it is important to specify that my knowledge and my experience is limited to this particular language group.
Yeah.
So, and there are different names for, I suppose, in different language group. So I think it's important because, first of all, traditional healing contributes in a innovative way, to understand better who we are as human beings. For Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, I think the most innovative component, from a mainstream healthcare system is the significance of the spirit of a person. Like in mainstream medicine, there is no mention of the spirit of a person, and it doesn't really, fit within the medical paradigm. Spirit is left to another kind of dimension of life. But for the Ngangkari, the first thing that they do, they have a diagnosis on how the spirit of a person is. And this means, physically, first of all, how it is positioned within the body, and, what kind of implication this positioning has on the person. So, they, really place a central importance to the spirit. Because they say that, the spirit has, can have physical implication. So a lot of people come and they have physical ailments or psychological ailments, and most of the times the healers, they bring it back to how the spirit is. So, it's, I'm not sure if any of you has had like a healing from the Ngangkari. So it's I've seen it over and over and over and again. When the spirit is moved and it's realigned, you can see straight away the change in the person. Whether it's whether they come with the low energy levels, you see that kind of the spark of life is back in their eyes. and many other consequences. So yeah, I think one of the main, and I think for Aboriginal people, what I've seen, across communities now for years, I think it has deeper meaning because it's a reconnection. It's a reconnection that goes beyond the belonging to a particular language group.
Yeah.
Wherever we go, always, people in the community say, you are, to the Ngangkari, you are our doctors,
Yeah.
And there is this sense of belonging. And, there is this sense of, and also, it improves the relationship with the health service in the community because they say, finally, the white fella doctors, listen to us and, they allow our doctors to, to be in the hospital or to be in the clinic and, they allow us to see them. So, also from this perspective, it has a great value. So I would stop here. I don't want to take all the time.
No, that's fine. And look, I think you read my mind exactly. One of the things why I really wanted to have Ngangkari or someone representing Ngangkari here, and also Uncle Paul Callaghan, you'll hear about his healing styles shortly, and what he does, especially in the mental health and wellbeing area. But it's one of the only areas that deals with spirit, and spirit is such an important part of cultural constructs, or want of a better word, and for me, and for anyone, I think that is that way inclined, and especially our mob, if you sit in the room with a Ngangkari and you can't see the spiritual work they do, it's mind-blowing, because you watch, as you said, this physical change take place and this spiritual and emotional change. So thank you so much for touching on that. And I think as mob, we have an excuse to actually almost talk about the spirit, whereas a lot of mainstream or Western medicine, I think that's why they don't necessarily have always the same outcomes. And it's also a strength-based approach. So thank you so much for that, for sharing your opinion. Uncle Paul, would you like to touch on some of that a little bit as well?
Yeah, a lot of it I'll echo what Francesca said. But first of all, I acknowledge country right across this nation, wherever anyone is being in. It's marvellous that we can connect this way. And I just wish I could visit everyone's country, because I just love visiting country so much. So I pay my respects to country and to those old fellas that cared for country since the beginning, and also to elders past, present and future, and the spirit ancestors, and I'm sure they're with us today. A couple of things. First of all, I do acknowledge the Ngangkari. I've had the privilege of sitting with the Ngangkari when they worked on my wife. They allowed me to watch. And also they did a miracle session with my younger son, who almost severed his hand. And they did a miracle session on him in Dubbo quite a few years ago now. And to me, they are the true healers. And so I feel a little bit kind of embarrassed being in the same speaking space as Ngangkaris, because I put them in such a high level of healing. If I was to describe myself, and I thought a little bit about it today, I'm not really, what I do, I wouldn't call it a healer per se. What I do is facilitate healing. So I use culture to reconnect people with that space. So tapping into what Francesca said, in answer to the question, I know there'll be other questions, but why are traditional healing practices so important? And I'll add a few words to that. Why is culture so important in the healing practice? So it may not be traditional. What I do really isn't traditional, because if you think about it, in traditional times, everything was there and I wouldn't have been needed. The stuff I do, and I'll explain that a little bit later, is to give us back what's been taken away. So I provide a facilitation role, because when you look at what's happened, and this is what I picked up in my PhD, we all know it as Aboriginal people, but I picked it up in terms of evidence, is when you look at the last 230 years, we had invasion, we had deaths by infection, then we had massacres, which killed 90% of our people, which then led to transgenerational trauma. And with the transgenerational trauma, those that were left had to cope with a very hostile environment of policy from 1900s, where our children were taken. And when you look at all those things in terms of a well-being perspective, what it has done is taken away, for many of us, our connection with culture and therefore our cultural identity in terms of law, ceremony, language, kinship, connection to country, all those things, particularly on the East Coast, but to a degree everywhere in Australia. And when you look at that, when our cultural practice is eroded and or destroyed, who we are is destroyed, and without identity, we don't have purpose. And without purpose, we don't have well-being. But you overlay on top of that the pressure from governments since the beginning to acculturate. So we're always being pressured to walk the walk of white privilege or white dominant culture. So we're taught what to think in schools. We're taught that we need to do well in a curriculum that is somewhat alien to us in many ways, and certainly intuitively not what we're interested in. Then we're forced to compete in the workforce and get a job, and then we're kind of pushed along a path that isn't necessarily ours in terms of who we are and in terms of where we come from and our connections. And then when you look at that, overlaid on top of that is the cultural unsafety that we're surrounded in. And in recent times with the Black Lives Matter protests and the absolute vomit of hatred that we've seen on social media, for Aboriginal people, Australia is an entirely unsafe place. So even if we had traditional culture still embedded in our practices, even if we had our own ways, our own places, we would still be very unwell because of the hatred that surrounds us. And so underpinning all that, why is traditional healing and connection with culture so important? It's because when you look at the Western system, it is scientifically based and it's very good at physical triage when there's an emergency. When my son almost severed his hand, it was a miracle that they got it back on because it was just hanging off by a bit of skin. And then the Ngangkari repaired all the pain that was in there as well. So this is all about complementary practice. So what I do is complementary to what's around me. So you look at the scientific methodology of the medical system, it can't measure spirit. It does a little bit of tinkering in mind, but when you look at our people for 60,000 years, we focused on mind, body and spirit surrounded all things. And yet, if you look at mental health, when we say we're having a spiritual experience, a psychiatrist or a psychologist might say that we're having a hallucinatory experience or episode. That means we're unwell, when in fact we're not. We're connecting with our culture. So the medical system, not only is it missing these huge gaps in terms of mind, body and spirit connectivity, it can also be very dangerous because it's actually alienating us from things that might be coming to us that actually can add to our well-being. So what I do is try and use my over 20 years of going bush with elders, and I try and use the knowledge I've picked up to support our people to reconnect with their identity, to reconnect with spirit, and to not avoid or ignore what the Western medicine system is saying, but bring them together and then define their own path forward in terms of how they do that. And so to me, that is one of many modalities we need, but for me, the Ngangkaris are an essential component of this that need to be replicated. And I know it's not that easy because you virtually are born a Ngangkari and then you're brought up with those skills. But we need the Ngangkari practices throughout Australia, and I always feel totally privileged when I'm in their company.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to concur with everything you both said. I can probably quickly reflect on two experiences. One is when I was having one of those experiences Uncle Paul was just talking about, where I'd had an old spirit fella come and sit next to me, and he told me my auntie had passed away. Anyway, so I got distracted and I looked next to me, this fella's gone. And if I'd have gone to a psych or anyone around that situation, I would have been locked up. Straight up, they would have said, this fella, he's got, he's seeing things, he's in psychosis, we probably need to deal with stuff. But I rang Uncle Paul Gordon, who's one of those elders that Uncle Paul Callaghan is talking about, and he just settled me straight away. He said, Stuart, you're not going crazy, mate, because I thought I was going womba. He said, you're not going crazy, you're just connecting with old people. It's all right. It's okay. And how wonderful it is that you have that connection, that experience. And so that to me was a huge experience that helped settle me as a young man. around some of the things I'd experienced culturally growing up. And number two, I was with Ngangkari in Sydney, who were doing a healing on my friend, and my hands started to burn and my belly started to go pretty nuts. And the Ngangkari was there, picked up on it straight away. She said, "Come here." And she told me what to do with what was going on with my body. And she knew exactly what my spirit was reacting to, and then how to, she told me to put my hands on my friend, and then I had one of the most wonderful sacred cultural experiences I've ever had in my life. And when Uncle Paul says that Ngangkari healing needs to be everywhere and that you're born with those talents, I think there's a lot of natural Aboriginal healers out there that have no instruction around what to do with that, and they end up being empaths or whatever and tapping in, but that instruction is so sacred, so wonderful. And so both of those comments are so pertinent to I guess the conversation, otherwise I wouldn't share it. I'm sure someone will have me put into a home later on. But Francesca, what role is Ngangkari playing in the mainstream medicine now? Have you been able to gain movement in that space, or is it something that is still a bit hard to get into?
Yeah, I just was reflecting also what Paul was saying about the complementarity of Aboriginal healing, traditional healing. I think that it's a slow process. I wish the process would be a little bit, faster, quicker. So we partner with New South Wales Health when we do come to New South Wales, specifically with the Western Local Health District, Western New South Wales Local Health District. And there are attempts, to create something similar to ANTAC model in Western Australia and in Queensland. So I have been contacted by Aboriginal units within the Department of Health in Western Australia. I'll give you an example. And they would like to, replicate and adjust, the model in Western Australia. So I'm not sure at what point they are now, but so I think that, what makes me very happy on one side is that, what we have achieved so far, which is, I think it's quite a lot compared to, if we consider that, we are a very small organization, unfunded, with very limited human resources. So it's really only two of us. And the Ngangkari. So, and we are, incorporated within the public hospital system here in South Australia, thanks to a government program, which is now, suspended, but hopefully we'll get back soon. So on one side, what makes me happy is to see that, the idea and the acceptance of having a traditional healing component within primary health care spread around the country.
Yes.
So, and there are attempts, to make and to create a space for traditional healers in different states. The other part that still makes me sad is that, I don't see any development yet at the national policy level. So, when I wrote the Hand-in-Hand report, so it was published in 2013. So, quite long time. To me, it seems like like another life ago. But, there hasn't been any significant change. Like at the moment, I know that the Closing the Gap framework is under review. And I put a submission and, I really, really hope that there will be someone up there working on, including Aboriginal traditional medicine as, another component, among the different streams to improve Aboriginal health. I think this is very, very, very important because, once we have a recognition at that top national policy level, You know, I think that it's another way which you can kind of, you know, find avenues, you know, to create more space for traditional healing within the health system. So, you know, and I truly believe that it's also the government responsibility to make this happen. You know, because, you know, it is a human right issue. It has ethical responsibility, you know, it's under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There is a specific article, Article 24, which recognizes the right of Aboriginal people, Indigenous people to access and practice, you know, the traditional healing. So this article it hasn't been embedded within the domestic jurisdiction yet. So how long is gonna take, you know, to have this change happening? So I really, you know, hope that key policymakers, Aboriginal policymakers in the government or, you know, dealing with the government would push, you know, this agenda forward. Because, you know, once, you know, we can get that recognition at that level, so then you create, you know, space, you know, just trickling down at the local level, at the state level for the creation of traditional healing services. Like one of the major issues we encounter is, you know, avenues for funding, you know, within the government, because, you know, there is not one kind of, you know, everything is very compartmental, you know, in the, you know, bureaucracies, in a very bureaucratic system, you know, but, you know, I think, you know, we can criticize that, but I think a better approach is, you know, to find a way around that, to navigate the system.
Yeah.
So, and trying to find the best way. So it's, so I think that once you have that, the component of Aboriginal traditional medicine, which is the closing the gap or a national framework on health, Aboriginal health, it will create also some funding opportunities for services to actually, you know, create that complementarity. So to create an employment avenue for the Ngangkari and other traditional healers across Australia. You know, when I look for application for funding opportunity within government, there is nothing specific. I think there should be something very specific about traditional healing. And I always have to kind of tweak, you know, what we do to fit, you know, the criteria already, you know, pre-established. So, but it's very hard because, you know, if you put an application for mental health, they said, oh, this is not really, it doesn't meet the criteria. It's not really mental health, you know, the Ngangkari are not qualified mental health practitioners. If you put it under, you know, primary health care, that's another story. So I think that, you know, the first step for a really like a cross-border recognition and implementation of the international human rights standard is to embed the right within a national policy platform.
Yeah. And
with that, you know, to create the different modalities through which, you know, like say like a health service in, I don't know, Cape York, or, you know, like in the Kimberley could actually, you know, start working towards a specific service. Now, I also have to say that, you know, within Aboriginal community control services, they have some flexibility, and that's how, you know, we kind of find ways to have partnership with different services. So, you know, within the social and well-being program, for example, they find ways of incorporating traditional healing as part of the cultural approach or, you know, social and emotional well-being. So, but I think that, you know, a significant step would be this recognition. I think, you know, it will kind of, you know, it will recognize Aboriginal traditional medicine as a knowledge system which has, you know, the same value as the scientific-based, mainstream model, is not something that, well, maybe if we find some, so it's about, valuing and acknowledging that it's a specific, well-defined, which, cannot be compared to the mainstream system. It cannot be judged according to, the modalities or the training criteria of the medical system. It can't. They're completely different system, and they have, both are valuable, but they function on different philosophical foundations, methodology, like a handing down of the knowledge, which is very different, and so forth. Yeah.
I totally concur with you. I know exactly what you're saying. You can't compare, but both are so relevant. And what's funny is one is much, much, much older than the other system. When you look at Western medicine, it is almost in its infancy as far as when you look at a historical timeline of medicine, whereas traditional medicine is, and Ngangkari is like, well, they've just proven Aboriginal people have been here 120,000 years. So we can say 120,000 years this practice has been happening. I think what some really major points you've touched on is like that national strategy, and touching on the human rights stuff, but a policy platform is something definitely on a huge level. And I'm listening to your story, and it's funny because I'm thinking of Vincent Ngangkari, and when Vincent Ngangkari first took his stance as far as trying to get land back, and he went into Sydney and right throughout New South Wales trying to get supporters, and he went back to the people and said, it's okay, we can wait, we've got friends in the south. And I've spoken a lot over the last couple of days about what's community's role in this, and how do we support. And I probably want to get back to that point and ask you, how do we support Ngangkari in a movement to move forward? But I think also bringing Uncle PC in here as far as his knowledge around policy and those things, and if he has some ideas around that space, but also any comments on what Francesca's been saying. Is there anything you want to add to that, PC?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot I can add to that. A couple of things about that. I worked in primary health for a little while, and then I got out when I realised I wasn't really making a difference. But as part of what I did some research with the community-controlled organisations, the AMSs, and what I found was the AMSs and the clients told me, our mob told me, that 90% of clients in there were there for social and emotional well-being needs, not for biological or physiological needs. And yet the AMS has got very little percentage of their funding for social and emotional well-being. So in terms of critical needs, we're not really being funded for what we need, not at all. And if you look at New South Wales Health, which is one of my clients in my consultancy work, they have 170,000 staff. Just think about that, 170,000 staff, and we want money for 20 Ngangkaris. So when you look at it in terms of context, there's just no will or desire to listen to our story. And so tapping into that, in terms of, Stuart flagged a question with me that I'll tie into this answer, and then I'll get back to the policy conversation. But in terms of why do I see these traditional healing methods so important, I've just said that they're complementary and they're essential. They're essential for a healing process, and they're also essential in terms of preventative work for our younger ones. And I come from a personal space for that. In my mid-30s, I was a good little black-white fella. I had a degree, I had 2 diplomas, I had 3 kids, I had a house, I had a mortgage, I towed the line, I was everybody's friend, I was a workaholic. And the white fellas put me up as this little kind of, look at him, we want everyone to be like him in the community because he's a good little Jackie. And then on the day of my 35th birthday, I had a nervous breakdown. It had been building, where I was in an incredibly bad place with a lot of anxiety, agoraphobia. And the medical system told me, the psychs and the psychologists and the psychiatrists all told me that I would never, ever heal, and that I would never be able to live a normal life, but I could manage it. In my mind, I went up, well, I've got a young wife and I've got 3 young boys here. they don't deserve an emotional cripple that's going to hold them back. I'll go and kill myself. And I walked down the street to do it. I walked down the street on this particular day to do it. And as I was about to do it, and this was before I went through ceremony, so I didn't have the cultural stuff to lean on. As I was about to do it, this kind of left field thought or voice said to me, no, maybe you don't have to kill yourself. Maybe you can prove all these white fellas wrong and you can heal yourself. And when you do that, you can start sharing what you learned with others and start helping them. So I trudged back up this hill, and it wasn't easy. There were years I reached out with all sorts of modalities. I did Reiki healing, and I became a Reiki practitioner myself. I read all sorts of spiritualities because I'd been told on the East Coast there's no such thing as culture, it's all dead. But then out of the blue, I was asked to go bush on the coast, and I went, gee, I can't believe this is real. And then I was told, no, they're all bullshit artists, and they're liars, and they're thieves, and they're con artists, and they're just weekend cowboys, and they make it up. So I went there and I sussed it out, and all I found was caring, all I found was love, all I found was knowledge, all I found was nurture, and I've been doing that for 21 years now because it's something that I was seeking, and that's the spiritual connection. And so that bode me well, because then when I reconnected with the Western world, I never aspired to a career, but I ended up becoming a CEO and the most senior public servant in New South Wales. And it was because I had all these skills, but it was primarily from culture and connecting to my feeling of who I was and feeling strong and centered and connected. And in terms of that, just one example of what's so powerful about our culture. And I'm just about finished my first book, and so it's really fresh in my mind, and it always reawakens me when I write about how beautiful our culture is. A simple thing like you'll hear people say, I need to walk country. But when you unpack that and understand the spirituality of that, which I live because of what the old people have told me and shared with me, and I'm constantly reminded of, is when we walk country, we're not just walking country, because the creation stories say that the mother gave birth to all living things. And so the trees, the birds, the animals, the insects, the plants, the fish, everything comes from the one mother, including us. So we're all brothers and sisters. So when I walk country, because I've been doing it for so long, I feel that. So when I'm walking country, I'm with family, and I'm no longer isolated on the outside looking in, which is the journey for most Aboriginal people in this country. We're always treated as outsiders, trying to fit in. But when I'm in country, I don't have to prove myself to anybody, and I can just sit there and I can be. And when you think about that, if you're with family and that family's been there for 60,000, 100,000, 20 million years, and they love you and they recognise you because you're reaching out with your spirit, they'll heal you. And the way the old people explain that too is when you're sick in spirit, you're also physically sick in your water, and you're 60% water. So for you to heal, you need your water to heal. And when you go bush and when you go swimming and when you cover yourself in water, you're healing yourself. And an example of that was this morning, I was up at 5:30 and did a bit of writing because my son said, let's go up to the beach, up to this special place up the beach. And so then I went up the beach this morning and just sat there and watched the waves roll in and let go of time. And then I went for a walk and sat where our old fellas used to sit. And then when we came back from that, my son, because he'd been surfing for an hour, he said, I'm going to grab some chips. So we sat there, and I've never done it before, but because I'm into connecting with the now, I sat and watched these bunch of seagulls around me. I'll tell you what, they're the funniest fellas. And they reminded me of Minions in that movie. They're all there squawking and they're all pushing each other, and they're really, really funny. And I've never felt so much peace just by going out. And I didn't really want to go out to country this morning because I wanted to keep on doing my writing, but my son kind of said, come on. And it was a nice reminder that we need to always go back and connect with country, because when we connect with country, it's not just country, it's with spirit. And that's the kind of stuff the Western system really doesn't get or want to get. And that's where we need to argue in terms of these policy settings, because to finish off, back to where I started, there's 170,000 staff in the New South Wales health system alone. In New South Wales alone, there's 220,000 Aboriginal people, but the big problem is, and we know that most of our people aren't well, we know that, but our population is going to grow by 55% in the next 30 years. And so we can't rely on this reactive medical system where you have to basically be almost dead for it to respond. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to reshape the agenda so this money is coming in. And the only way we can do that is by, unfortunately, somehow demonstrating proof of this and providing an evidential base. So something myself and Uncle Paul Gordon have been working on at length for the last 2 years is to try and create our own Aboriginal university. So we can actually have our own pedagogy and epistemology of how we deliver in an Aboriginal way. But also we can start doing research into wellbeing so we can actually have the evidence so governments won't see us as a risk, because governments are actually driven by risk assessment. They'll say, if I put it out that way and I can't prove why I'm sending that money, then that's a big risk if the papers pick it up. Unless, of course, it's someone rich in a big company, then you just give them the money and say, I don't have to tell anybody. But for us, we have to push a lot harder to get access to what we need to look after our people. And that's the biggest challenge. I know the Ngangkaris do great work, and I know that kind of network needs to be expanded. I know the kinds of things I do. We know it works because there's already research that says it. But for some reason, we just can't get the funding. And yet I see a lot of non-government organisations getting literally billions of dollars to service our people.
Yeah. Under
a fraudulent kind of cloth, if you like. They really don't understand our community, and they really don't want to. They just want to achieve the KPIs so they can fund more positions within their organisations. And so it's a great frustration. But on the positive, we do have within our resources already the knowledge base to know what works. Everyone I'm talking to today, I'm sure if I sat with you and did a brainstorm and you told me what you think's worked, you'll nail it. Because as a community, we know what works. The big problem is getting the doors open so that people will listen to us. That's me.
Thanks. And I was taking the conversation in one direction, and in your wisdom, you pulled me back, which was lovely. And thank you so much for that guidance. Francesca, do you want to maybe, because a lot of people may not know, but do you may want to talk through what a Ngangkari session looks like? What kind of happens is, you know, from turning up through to the session, and I know it would vary from person to person, but maybe an average, what an average Ngangkari session would look like. Anyway, you get my drift.
Yeah, sure. Well, one distincting, feature is that, the Ngangkari don't take your personal history in the sense of how a GP would do. So someone shows up, depends on where we are, we just have a little intake form just to keep record of the people. That's just for, administration purposes. Goes in, and it really, it depends. Some people, it depends also on the preference of the person who meets the Ngangkari. Yeah. So some people are very quiet and they don't. I think at the beginning there is just this quiet of 5 minutes quiet moment where kind of the Ngangkari and the person kind of suss them out. So yeah. Sometimes, some people, tell all the story, what happened to them. And, so there is this conversation going on, mostly from, the person towards the Ngangkari. So usually the Ngangkari doesn't talk much at all. So their healing is very intuitive, but also it's like hands-on. So the first, if there is no talking, they say, can you lie down? And the first thing that they do is to assess whether the spirit of the person is aligned. So the first area that they look at is the belly area. So they go straight there because they think that that's the main area where everything comes from, all ailments. And so it's a light touch, kind of. It's not a massage. It's hard to describe. It's not a massage. It's they call it pampuni, but it's a kind of this that they're kind of trying to touch and they feel where the issues are, and then the main method of healing is this taking out taking out from the body, whether it's pain, whether it's a blockage. So this, yeah, just feeling and then taking out. That's the main healing methods. And then it depends, you know, some people come with very specific issues in specific areas of the body. So they go to the, say, the shoulders, the knees, the legs. Often when people have low energy or they don't eat well, or also with kids who are a bit, you know, thin or they don't eat well, they use another method, which is called the blowing. So they blow from the head or directly where on the part of the body where the issue is. So for example, I've seen a few people coming with asthma or like a respiratory problem, and yeah, they use both methods, like this kind of touch, which is not always a light touch. Actually, it can, you know, sometimes that's pretty strong to grab whatever is inside, and they blow through the lungs. So the realignment of the spirit is also done by hands. And it's very physical in the sense they move the spirit, they can feel it and they move it around in the body. So once it happened to me, my spirit was up here in the shoulder. So they kind of push it, you know, it's a kind of a pressure, and then they push it, you know, to the right place. Sometimes, you know, there are presences, not physical presence, spiritual presence. Yeah. There can be family visiting, or there be someone who has passed away, or there might be also, there are some, you know, cases in which there are nasty beings present. And that's, you know, when we were talking about that, you know, that's, you know, if the ideal would be to have a really you know, like hand-in-hand approach where, you know, the psychiatric or, you know, the psychologist will consult first with the healer to see whether someone has a psychosis or schizophrenia, or if, you know, something else, it's culturally, which is not a psychosis, so there is actually someone there or someone inside the body.
Yeah.
So this, I think the most powerful healing that I have witnessed is the release from the body of negative spirits. I suppose it can be compared to what it's called, we call exorcism. Exorcism.
Yeah.
Esorcismo in Italian. In Italian. And so that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes you need 2 or 3 Ngangkari. There have been instances in which we had to go back and, you know, just leave and come back with 3 Ngangkari. So there are cases in which people are sick, or, you know, in terms of like suicide prevention, for example. There have been cases where, you know, people have some nasty spirits inside, and, you know, the impact on their mental status. And, you know, when people say, oh, I hear voices, so these voices might not be hallucination, but it actually can be some, you know, like bad spirits suggesting to people to kill themselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, for the Ngangkari, it's nothing out of the normal, you know. Of course, if you talk to a doctor, it's like, you know, but that's why it's important, you know, like a cross-cultural understanding, you know, because if both, you know, if mainstream doctors would know better, you know, what kind of healing and on what kind of concepts and, you know, they're based, so they would be able to collaborate better. Yeah, but you need like an open mind.
Yeah.
So the session, so back to the main question, okay, can vary from, you know, like a simple, you know, quite brief. Usually the sessions are not very long. Another thing that, you know, I see is that people always ask, it actually is really interesting. People always ask, how long is a session? And, you know, I say like an average time, but it doesn't go by time like a massage. You know, people expect like a 60-minute session, but the Ngangkari are pretty, again, you know, they don't talk much. So they go there straight, they're very straightforward. They go, they see the issue, they remove it, done.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, they're not billing by the hour. They're dealing with what needs to be dealt with, and that's all that needs to happen. So that's what happens, and then it's done.
Yeah, sometimes some people, you know, come and the Ngangkari check them out, and everything is fine, you know. So in 5 minutes, the session is over.
Yeah.
Then I say, you know, everything is fine. You know, you're fine.
Yeah.
But you know, there is expectation that.
Yeah, and that's, I think, because we've been conditioned. You go to a doctor, you get your medicine, and he checks you out, and then you walk away with a solution. But often the solution with Ngangkari is it's happened, it's done, you're good. That's all you need. And people go, well, hang on, where's my prescription? Where's my bottle of pills?
Or sometimes I say, so just go back home and see how you feel, and then, you know, come and see me if you want. Like there is never this. Some people ask, so, you know, how many times should I come? And we never say, no, you know, come 3, 4, 5 times. So, you know, we don't have like packages of, say, you know, like 10 massage or, you know, no. So we just let the Ngangkari say, look, you're fine now. See how you feel. Come back maybe in a couple of weeks if you're here. If you want to see me again, I'll check you out. So yeah, it's much more, I don't know how to say, kind of simpler. Yeah, kind of very, I found it very, I would find the word.
Not pathologized?
Yeah, kind of direct and very...
Quite often what I say, Francesca, is the profound is in the simple. When we, you know, when you look at old fellow ways, because I share a lot of that stuff when I write and talk, and people go, I understand that. That's so simple, and yet it works. And I go, yeah, that's because our old fellows are clever. But if I can just tap into what Francesca was saying, because we are just about out of time, from some of my experiences, the Ngangkaris are amazing healers, and a similar thing where it's kind of healing, but in terms of spaces, is I've been asked to go into places where I've had to smoke and get rid of bad spirits and exorcism, all that kind of stuff. And something that the old people taught me and I'm aware of is if you can do that, but if you're not careful, you got to tell the people, don't go doing A, B and C or they'll come back. And for me, that ties into the healing process too. You can have a healing or you can do things, but then you need to start owning your own journey of healing so that you don't relapse. And so part of that is when I do my stuff, it's about yarn ups and walking country and that kind of thing. And an example of that where it is complementary and tapping into our culture, my observation is a lot of our people, you've got to think about why does the spirit misalign itself? Why mentally do we get worn down? It's because of what's around us. And you can try and change what's around us, but really what you need to do is have a think about how you're dealing with it inside, which is why the spiritual connection is so important. But also my observation with a lot of our mob, and from personal experience too, is one of the major things that surrounds us and embeds in us is fear. You think about it, when we venture into the world, there's a lot of fear because we want to hold on to our jobs, we want to succeed, but there's lots of hostility around us. And we go through a school system where we feel we're being watched, and so we're forever kind of scanning and looking at ourselves and saying, where do I fit? What do I need to do? And you'll see it in the jails for the boys where you know they have to conform, otherwise there's a lot of danger for them. So we have a lot of fear, but when we take fellows bush and we show them sights and we connect them with spirit and country and mother, when you know you've got these old fellas around you, when you know that you're connecting to the ground that your people walked on for thousands of generations, when you know there's something there that you can tap into that doesn't give a shit about the legal system, doesn't give a shit about gungies, doesn't give a shit about all that, when you know there's real power and love to tap into, fear no longer controls your life, and then you start building trust, and you start building trust in your cultural connections, but also in a very real way, you've also got people around you that you know you can share with. And so this spiritual connection then starts to connect with and I wrote a chapter about it, I finished this morning, about the importance of relationships. Our people talk about the relationships with each other and your relationships with extended family, but our relationships right across Australia, traditionally in terms of our kinship lines, but also our relationships with country and our relationships with spirit. And once you start to understand that, a step at a time, of course, you're no longer lonely and you're no longer overtaken by fear. It might come, but you can say, I can manage that. And so that's where I see myself as complementary to the other things, because you need to take away with you, what are the things I need to work on with me so I'm no longer as vulnerable.
Yeah. Love it. Thanks, Al. Last couple of minutes, I wanted to also ask, how can we support you in your journey, Francesca? And then any last statements that you guys want to leave us with?
I think, even just keep talking about the importance of traditional healing in different kind of gathering and sharing stories and sharing, maybe not feeling that is something not valuable to be shared. So I think that it kind of raised the consciousness of everyone in terms of valuing this, ancient and amazing knowledge system. And another thing is, for communities to have like an ongoing conversation with the healthcare service of community services, and just let them know, that traditional healing is something that is wanted. Sometimes community members are shy, they're shy, they think that their voice is not heard. But, like in Western New South Wales, what has happened is that, people keep ringing the health service and ask for the healer to come back, and that makes a huge difference because, if the communities wants something, just make your voice be heard, through the health services so that, when the manager have to decide what to do, you have the community, the voice of the communities that is, out there. So I think it's a very important way of, kind of spreading the knowledge around also, especially in this, in the mainstream healthcare system. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Uncle Paul, any last words for us?
Yeah, I've worked in the political system and I left it and was unemployed and started my own business because I was so disillusioned with what I saw. Once I became really senior and worked with ministers, I realised there was no genuine desire to change or fix things, and that by staying there I was part of the problem. So I don't want to sound cynical, but I've been there and I've seen it. So I have no trust in any of our politicians. It needs to start at the ground level, and we're seeing through Black Lives Matter, we're seeing a groundswell of not only Aboriginal people, but also non-Aboriginal people starting to aggregate. We need to continue that because we need to push at the ground and push it up so that it doesn't become a force. But in my own way, what I'm trying to do, because I'm so burnt out with trying to knock on these doors, I'm just writing my second book. I've also written 2 novels that are done. One of them's part of my PhD that will be out. My new book will be out next year, and then the novels will be the year after. But I wrote the novels to try and make our culture more accessible. So novel 1 is for young Aboriginal people to feel proud of their culture and to create conversations at a local level with their elders so they can find out what that means to them. The second novel is more targeting a non-Aboriginal audience so they can understand our ways. But I just want to finish off with one of the comments in the first novel. This old Aboriginal mentor was with a young fellow who was stolen and being shown culture and reconnecting. And what the old fellow says to him, he says, back in the 60s and 70s, our old people fought hard to give us the same rights as white people. And we cherish them and we're always in honour of what they did for us. Now is the time for us to champion being black. Because when you look at the journey, we're pushed through school and we're told how to be white. And when our people fought hard, we fought hard to get housing and education, all those things. And that's really, really critical for us. But I think now we need to really start challenging for us to have the right to re-embrace our culture and push for our cultural ways, including our traditional healing, walking country and all those things, because that's part of who we are. Done.
Thank you both so much. I've said a few times throughout today that I want to create ongoing conversations through this space and try not to leave it where once every couple of years people get together and have a conversation. And I would love to pick your brains again, and as this grows, and I have full faith that this will grow, because I know my ancestors have put me here in this space today to push this agenda. I'd love to be able to reconnect with you both and utilise your guidance and your wisdom in this space again. And
sure.
Hope you enjoyed it. And
thank you for the invitation. Thanks, Stuart.
No, thank you so much for having us.
Lovely listening to your story.
Cheers. All right.
Bye.
See you guys. Thank you so much for everything.
Great to see you, Francesca. See you, Stu.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.